My name is Joe. I'm a Central Texas camper. Now I've owned a Springbar Classic Jack 140 hot tent package for just over 3 years. I'm going to share some tips with you that I've learned along the way, and hopefully it'll make your next camping adventure a little more enjoyable. The first tip is a free tip. And by that I mean it costs me no money and you no money. In regards to these flaps. So when I first got the tent, I used to unzip these flaps and let them fall into the interior of the tent. And while this is a large and roomy tent, we're still trying to maximize every square inch of it, right? So when you let this flap fall into the tent, depending on how far you zip, you're losing 3, 5, 8 or more inches of space with this flap. And it's really inconvenient. It's always in the way. So what I've learned to do is I've learned to just flip it to the exterior of the tent. That cost me no money. And I've instantly created a clean line and reduced an inconvenience for the people walking in the tent or sitting in that chair. The second tip regards noise in the tent. So if you've ever camped in high wind, you know that the little metal zipper pulls in high winds will bounce off the metal zipper bodies, and it creates a high-pitched chatter. And in high wind, it can be very frustrating. That happened to us once, and I came home and did some research, and I found somebody who had already solved the problem. So this is not my solution, but this is a solution. And the solution was to take 1/2 inch heat shrink tube, push it up the metal zipper, pull as far up as it'll go. And what you're doing is you're creating a barrier of plastic between the pull and the body. And so now there is no sound. You may hear my finger a bit hitting the zipper, but there is no sound on that metal pull hitting that body. There's 16 to 18 of those zipper pulls in this tent, depending on how you have your tent configured, whether it's hot tent camping or not. But yeah, that was a significant quality improvement in how we camp. I would highly recommend not using a heat gun to shrink that heat shrink. Heat guns are very powerful. You can't really control the direction of all the air, and I think it's a high risk for those metal zippers to have that much hot air blowing on them. We used a lighter and it worked great. The second set of tips regards the sleeping arrangement. So a couple of these you've probably heard. If you're watching this video, you've probably heard other people talk about using cots. And they serve two purposes. For number one, it almost doubles your storage capacity on this side of the tent, right? So tons of additional sleeping areas or storage area down there. I said sleeping because sometimes our dog will sleep under there, so that gives him a kind of cave space. You've probably heard people talk about, if you're hot tent camping, that the further off the ground you are, the warmer you feel. And I can tell you that I've conducted experiments and can say irrefutably it is warmer. So if I load the stove up and then begin to take temperature measurements, the sleeping area of the cot is 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the ground. Go midway, it's another 10 degrees, and up to the ceiling, it's another 10 degrees or so. So significant variation. So if you're going through the trouble of trying to make your tent hot, it makes a lot of sense to sleep where it is warm, and cots will definitely help you do that. A third benefit of cots I haven't heard anybody talk about regards putting them side by side, right? So 2 cots side by side, put a double pad on top of that and a double sleeping bag on top of that. This configuration was really game changing for our small family. So it's when we're camping, it's me, my wife, our child, and our pet, right, our dog. Our son, when we're camping, really is comforted when he sleeps with a parent. And so if you look at this cot and the pad on top of it, the cot has a natural bow, and so the pad has a bow. And what this creates is with that double sleeping bag, it creates a common sleeping area, but the bowing of the cots creates a separation between the two people sleeping. A very comfortable separation. So our son is comforted by the being able to reach through the sleeping bag, and his parent is there, and then the parent is comforted because this bowing effect keeps our son on his cot, and he is much less likely to roll into our side on top of us, interrupting our sleep. So this sleep configuration, in addition to additional storage and being warmer, is just amazing in terms of creating a boundary between you and the person that you're sharing the sleeping bag with. If I pivot to the business end of the tent, I'll say one thing about the canvas tent and the hot tent package is it was completely foreign to me, right? Again, I live in Central Texas. The only reason I got this configuration is we lost power and water for 4 days in 2019 because of an ice storm, and I promised myself and my wife that we would never be unprepared again. We'd always have some sort of shelter that we'd be able to heat. And this is it. But my point is I've had to learn how to use this. And one of the things I've come to learn and appreciate is to be strategic about the type of wood that you're selecting, the species of tree you're selecting to burn in your wood stove. So specifically and anecdotally for me, being in the hill country, I have unlimited access to ash juniper, which we call cedar, and oak. Now, if you're in Central Texas, I know a lot of people just broke their neck saying, what, you're burning ash juniper in your wood stove? And the reason that is because our ash juniper is covered in a papery bark, and it's very high in resin. So between those things, it can be a really dirty smoke. But again, I've been strategic about it. So I will process my ash juniper or cut it down, wait about 6 months, and then I will peel all the bark off it. You can see it's missing the papery bark on it, and that allows me to have a much cleaner burn. Now, it still has resin or sap in it, and so it's still going to be a quick burn, but that's okay. I'll burn that during the day. I don't mind reloading the stove every hour and a half. No big deal. But as I transition to the evening, I will replace the cedar with oak. And being a different species, it also burns hot, but it doesn't burn as quickly. And so what I can do is I can load up the Winterwell Nomad large stove. I can close this dampener about 80%, and I can close the air inlet all the way. And even though that's fully closed, there's still enough oxygen being pulled in to that stove that I'll have a very warm and comfortable burn for hours. Now, there's no manual explaining that, right? That's just setting up the tent. Every time I have a significant cold front come through, my neighbors know I'm setting the tent up, and I'm practicing and I'm learning. So I highly encourage you, use your gear when it's convenient, so that you know how to use it when times are inconvenient. The last tip I have for you regards the size of your stove. So the standard length of a wood split, whether it's gas station, big box store, tree service company, it's going to be, if they're selling it, it's 16 inches. So 16 inches is the golden standard. The large Nomad Winterwell is 18 inches front to back. So while my wife is a certified arborist and we have unlimited access to wood, I like knowing and intentionally purchased a stove that allows me to pull off at any big box store, gas station, and I can buy wood if I need to, and it's going to fit. The number one complaint I see from people that have purchased smaller stoves, the number one complaint online is that there's an additional processing of wood to put into their stove before the burn. Now, I guess when I look at that, it could be a inconvenience. I've positioned it, or I've heard it as an inconvenience, but I would argue that depending on your family situation, it could be a net positive. Let me give you an example. When we go to camp, we're often looking for things to do, right? And when our child is old enough to use a saw, maybe I won't, or an axe or whatever, maybe I will not spend so much time processing wood myself before the camp. Maybe I'll bring some unprocessed wood for him to process while we're there. And so I can certainly imagine a family or campers who have a medium stove and it doesn't bother them at all. They don't mind chopping down their wood a little bit smaller. So you just have to figure out like what you want your camping experience to be, and then buy the stove that best matches that experience, or best support that experience. At any rate, my name's Joe. I'm the Central Texas Camper. I hope you found these tips useful. I'm very interested in any additional tips you have regarding canvas tent, camping, or any other type of camping. Really interested in your tips. Leave them in the comments below.